We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Washington, D.C., and indeed the United States of America appear in turmoil. The Senate is anxious to get things done, but with only a vote advantage to the Democrats courtesy of Vice President Kamala Harris, and of course Senators Manchin and Sinema not willing to give up the filibuster, desperation and frustration abound. On top of this, we have President Joe Biden, whose popularity, once lauded as, if not impressive, at least stable, has started to tumble. What does all this portend for 2022 and beyond? Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio. I'm your host, Mark Angelides, and for our show today, we'll be looking at the widely speculated talk of a Trump-DeSantis ticket in 2024 with writer and broadcaster Jeff Charles. Will it or won't it happen? And are the potential hopefuls wise to keep a lid on any news? We'll also be talking with economic guru Andrew Moran to ask that all-important question: have Democrats, and specifically President Biden, abandoned what was once considered received wisdom? It's the economy, stupid, when it comes to making a play for the votes. All this and more on Liberty Nation Radio. But first, let's hear what the big players have to say on Liberty Nation's signature Say What segment. Well, if it seems like you're living in bizarre world and all that once was is no more, you're not alone. Political watchers have been surprised to find that the long-held Democratic opposition to voter ID laws is no more. But not content with calling it a 180-degree volte-face, the Biden-friendly media is casting this as an evolution of their position rather than a flip-flop. But what could have presaged such a turnaround? The more skeptically minded of you out there may put it down to recent polling by Monmouth University that found that 8 out of 10 respondents want some form of voter ID at the ballot box. That figure includes 91% of Republicans, 89% of independents, and even 62% of Democrats. So with the public behind voter ID, what was a party that has spent decades against such a measure to do? Well, they had two options. Option one was to say, hey, we misjudged what you guys wanted, and we're here to deliver. Or option two was just to pretend that you never actually supported such a thing in the first place. One such senator opted for the don't let your lying eyes fool you option was New Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock, who, speaking to NBC, said, quote, I have never been opposed to voter ID, and in fact, I don't know anybody who is, end quote. Well, that may come as a surprise to one Raphael Warnock from 2012, 2015, 2016, and even as far back in those heady days of 2021. Here's a short compilation of his views prior to the seismic shift in public opinion.
With these unnecessary and unjustifiable voter ID laws, which constitute, in my estimation, a poll tax.
Dealing with these voter ID laws, this is not about voter verification. This is about voter suppression. All of these voter suppression laws saying we've got to have voter ID laws. This is Jim Crow in new clothes.
Sticking with Georgia, failed gubernatorial candidate and voting rights activist Stacey Abrams was one of the first to evolve her position without quite saying so. Here's Ms. Abrams' stated position on April 27th of this year.
Voters without a driver's license or state ID must surrender their personal information and risk identity theft just to receive an absentee ballot. And then there are the 200,000 Georgia voters who don't have either ID and the putative free ID that is not free when you factor in the cost of transportation and the cost of underlying documents. You can read the full list of objections to SB 202 at stopjimcrow2.com.
Couldn't be much clearer, right? Now here's her position less than 2 months later on June 17th.
That's one of the fallacies of Republican talking points that have been deeply disturbing. No one has ever objected to having to prove who you are to vote. It's been part of our nation's history since the inception of voting.
It's almost as if some folks don't know the Internet Wayback Machine exists at all. But it's not only on this subject that the present government is having issues. With voter ID being presented as a racial issue despite the overwhelming majority support in the American public for such a thing, including 84% of black Americans, you might think that the Democratic Party politicians would have their racial ally credentials up to date. Not so for Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, who has come under mild fire for belonging to an exclusive club that has few, if any, minority members. Now, this was first noticed in 2017, and 4 years later, despite the Summer of Love, the racially charged rhetoric, and riots that swept the country, very little seems to have changed. Here's the senator dealing with questions that, if the mainstream media were serious, would be topping the front page of your papers this very day.
Okay, back in 2017, you had expressed concerns about the membership of the all-white Bailey's Beach Club, said that you hoped it would become more diverse. Now, your family's been members, your wife is one of the largest shareholders. Has there been any traction in that? Are there any minority members of the club now?
I think the people who are running the place are still working on that, and I'm sorry it hasn't happened yet.
Do you have concerns in 2021? I mean, obviously it's been 4 years. You had remarks on the floor following the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd saying, hoping to root out systemic racism in the country. Your thoughts on an elite, all-white, wealthy club, again, in this day and age? Should these clubs continue to exist?
It's a long tradition in Rhode Island, and there are many of them. I think we just need to work our way through the issues. Thank you.
The card's here. You have to continue.
And what of the Senate filibuster? A mechanism that has been used by both parties for a very long time, and an estimated 300 or more uses by the Democratic Party over the last several years alone. All of a sudden, the filibuster is tradition non grata. Could it be that with a 50-50 split in the Senate and a simple majority most often made possible by the input of Kamala Harris donning her hat as the president of the Senate for a tie-breaking vote, that Democrats are frustrated that they might need to make concessions to their Republican colleagues to enact any legislation that can't be pushed through with reconciliation? When you avail yourself of a congressional mechanism hundreds of times and then cry foul when your opposition uses it, there's a word for that. And it's a word that even the usually supportive Fourth Estate is coming dangerously close to applying to the party they often seem to be in favor of. We'll end with a bombshell. CNN's Jake Tapper seems more than a little astonished at these continuous flip-flops. Speaking to Senator Richard Blumenthal, here's the exchange on why the Connecticut senator now opposes the filibuster.
Democrats control the White House, they control the House, they control the Senate. I mean, what are you talking about? You're preventing billionaires from controlling politics. I mean, you guys control everything right now.
We may have an evenly divided Senate and control because the vice president can break a tie, but the filibuster rules, as the American people are beginning to understand, require us to have 60 votes just to proceed to debate, just to talk about the bill. And that's why a lot of us, including many of our leaders, believe that we should tremendously modify the filibuster. I'm in favor of abolishing it. But in the meantime, we can mobilize support among the American people to understand that dark money, the money that goes to elections without disclosure, is determining the outcomes. And that's what we need disclosure to shine a light on. And that's why this bill is so important, to end that kind of corruption.
Senator, haven't you voted in favor of filibustering Republican legislation, not allowing them to even proceed to a discussion, an amendment process, and debate on a bill?
We have used the 60-vote threshold a number of times. For example,
but you're talking about it being corrupt, but you've used it too.
And there you have it. It seems that even credibility can only be stretched so far. We'll be right back on Liberty Nation Radio after this short break. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.